Welcome to this edition of Inside the Cave. I'm your host, David Kessel. This episode is an interview with Denny Tedesco discussing his film, The Wrecking Crew. The Wrecking Crew were a fabulous bunch of musicians that played on countless recordings during the 1960s in the Los Angeles area. As a matter of fact, they played on virtually everybody's record coming out of Los Angeles at that time. So sit back and relax and learn about The Wrecking Crew. Denny Tedesco, welcome to Inside the Cave.
Thank you.
I'm David Kessel, and this is about your movie, The Wrecking Crew.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Well, so this is the story of our fathers, Tommy Tedesco, Barney Kessel, Hal Blaine, and the rest of the group of session players in the 60s. These were the folks that were basically the guys that did all the recordings for Sinatra, the Beach Boys, Janet Dean, Mamas and Papas, anything that was happening in the recording scene, these guys were part of in the early 60s. And supposedly the older guys said these guys are going to wreck the business because they're playing rock and roll. So that's what this story is about, and how they were
a special group that really fed off of each other.
Yeah.
And were spontaneous, and they worked very well with the arrangers and having just a basic chord chart and coming up with parts.
Yeah, I mean, it was a time when the record business, I always say, was at its infancy. Because it's interesting, because your dad's coming out of, he's well established as a jazz player and playing in the studios in the 50s, where music was really, the biggest hits were, it was going to be Sinatra or something more traditional. What happens, I think, that the rock and roll thing is the record companies didn't trust the actual rock groups to actually record because they didn't feel there was money in it. So they started getting the studio players like your dad and my dad and all those folks to go in and do this recordings for these groups that maybe were not as good in the studios or singers, and they knocked out 3-4 songs in 3 hours.
Well, that's what the union even required that you be.
Yeah, they didn't
do that.
Yeah, they didn't want you knocking out any more than 3 or 4 because then you would have been knocking out work for others. They could have.
So in this movie, which I saw recently, phenomenal. I'm glad that I finally got to see it. It really gets to the heart of the matter of what you just said, playing on all of these hit records. I mean, massive records. Yeah. I mean, you talk about these bands like the Turtles. I mean, it's Wrecking Crew. Right. You talk Sonny and Cher, it's Wrecking Crew. Phil Spector, that is the Wrecking Crew.
That is the wall of sound.
Yeah.
Is that.
So, this is a labor of love?
Yeah, I started in 1996. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. And I thought, well, if I don't start filming him and telling his story now, it's over. Mm-hmm. And I put together a round table for him, Hal Blaine, Plaz Johnson, Carol Kay, and I thought, okay, let's just start filming with film. And I had two dollies with film cameras roaming, and it came out really well. But no one believes that record companies and publishers will ever come together. So there was over 100 songs.
Right, ambitious.
Yeah, and you can't tell the story without the music. It's impossible. So I just kept on building, interviewing people. Interviewed Cher, interviewed Nancy Sinatra, Brian Wilson, finally got him, Jimmy Webb, Glenn Campbell, Roger McGuinn, Herb Alpert, Lou Adler, and I kept going and going.
That's a pretty heavy cast.
Yeah, and kept going. I still go. I mean, did Bill Medley last month.
Oh, that's great.
I feel like sooner or later I'm going to, even though the film's done, I still want their voices in it.
I think a big challenge here is separating out a story of your dad and telling the story of the musicians, which you've done very, very well.
Well, thank you.
And I know that that's a fine line that you have to make a decision about.
Yeah, I mean, for the people that haven't seen the film, it was when I initially wanted to tell the story, I was not going to be part of it. It was really going to be about this group of musicians. Why am I telling the story?
More insightful approach.
And I said, all right, fine, and I did that. And it was actually worked out very well, considering I didn't want to be part of it. I'm not on camera, thank God, which I don't like.
Well, thanks for being here.
Well, yeah. But it ended up actually opening up a lot more doors once as a director telling the story from my point of view. because now I could slide over when I needed something from my father. I could take that piece and I could, tell it from a different point of view, which was more unique on my part. So
You've had so many challenges, and yet you've had so many awards. Tell us about that.
yeah, I mean, all right. So 2006 came around, and we had all this, all this footage we shot, and we didn't have a film. It was just basically a bunch of footage and a 14-minute teaser. 2008, we finally had a cut, and we entered South by Southwest as our first festival. Well, that's 2008. World goes upside down economically.
Yeah.
We won a lot of awards, won over a dozen awards, 50 festivals all over the world, and still no one would jump on it. I had already prearranged payments for publishers, and I did actually get all the agreements from the labels and the publishers, so they did come around, and it was a high agreement. And one of the publishers said to me, about 2 years in 2010, said, you got to go back and renegotiate, because you're never going to get this thing out there, because as much as you want to pay us, it is a documentary, and the reality is
The revenue generation
is not going to make it. It's not. We're not.
The math doesn't cut.
It doesn't cut.
Yeah.
If it was 2005, it would have cut, because if you were looking at other films at the time that made a lot of money. Well, times change quickly. So I went back, renegotiated with the labels and the publishers, and they came down. There was never, not one problem. There's one problem, one publisher, which I won't mention his person's name. No one knew who he was, but he was a pain in the ass. But that was it. Everybody...
There's always one in the bunch.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. No, so that's what we ended up doing is going back. I had to go back to all these companies, renegotiate, and got them down to a
More reasonable?
more reasonable. And they all agreed. My biggest thing is there's so much music. I mean, there's over 100 songs. I think it's 130 cues. There were two ideas. One was, why don't you put less songs in? All right, well, you could do that if you were doing, let's say, Motown. Like Motown, you could do 5 songs in Motown. You could play the Supremes, Smokey, Michael, whatever, and it's a Motown.
You get the vibe.
You get the vibe.
Right.
But as I said, what does Sinatra, the Beach Boys, the Monkees, Mamas and Papas, and Chipmunks have in common? These same musicians. And that is what I had to show is quantity. I don't want to use, sometimes not always quality, as I like to say. But it really had to show it was a working factory here. Good or bad, it's intense.
They're playing the music they're given, and you can only do so much with it.
Yeah. I blame the musicians for my problem. They made too many hits.
Yeah, made too many hit records.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful undertaking. Having been there and grown up with that, I really feel like I got a monkey off of my back, because it's a story that hasn't been told, and the guys are all gone. And it's all pretty much over, except there's a few. Hal, you got some really good footage of Hal.
It's sad because I'm so happy that we got what we got, or I got what I got at the time. I mean, if I would have started 5 years earlier, I would have had your dad. I would have had, Jack Nitzsche,
right,
Steve Douglas, and maybe Ray Pullman. Those are the other core players. But you know what? I was happy with who I was able to get.
You've gone as a sleuth all over, getting whatever footage you can, covering this to put this wonderful story together, which is unique.
Yeah.
And I know there's gotten a lot of excellent response, and a lot of people really are surprised to learn that it's like, wait a minute, I thought that was a group. I thought that was a group.
Yeah.
I thought that was a group.
And it's funny because you and I and so many others are the families, whatever. Yeah. You forget because you're part of it. You were, you grew up in it, so you forget most of the world doesn't realize that these guys were the Beach Boys backing band or recording band, and that's just the way it was in the business.
Well, I think you mentioned this as well, but I've gone over like some of my dad's books of the appointment books, from the 60s and stuff like that, and it's like, it's scary because it's like, do this day, do that day, work with these guys, and then do the Steve Allen show, and then do this thing and do that thing, and it's like that's just normal for them.
Yeah.
And that's what's so unique about it. It's a spectacular time capsule.
Yeah, and people don't understand that. The other thing is at the end, is your dad got went to do back to his jazz thing, which I didn't realize was exactly the time when the studio thing started changing in the late '60s. He started going on his road in '68, '69.
Right in that pocket, that's when he said it's over.
Yeah.
And as we know it.
It's funny because '67 is the heyday.
Right.
If you look at the contracts of rock and roll for these guys, '67 was the heyday for my dad in terms of records. And then, fortunately my father went into TV and film.
Yeah, TV and film, right.
But at that point, the groups started playing their own stuff. They didn't need to have our dads or anybody else to play for them. And there was different, like we said, James Taylor's there with Carole King and all those groups. It was a different element. And
one of the things right at that point is when album budgets started to go like into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Everybody's hanging out on drugs and doing this and experimenting with that. And the record companies had to really kind of reevaluate their whole brain cells. Yeah, the record companies then all of a sudden are like, hey, what happened to the album budget? It's like, what do you mean, a couple $100,000? At that point, we're talking about 1967-ish, right in that pocket when the San Francisco scene was going on, a lot of psychedelic bands and experimentation.
Right.
And of course, Pet Sounds, which is all Brian Wilson and Wrecking Crew.
Right.
And so you've got that, and you've got Sgt. Pepper's, which is Beatles, and they use some horn players in strings and things like that. But it was all tightly controlled.
Yeah.
It was all very serious. Whereas if you're given an unlimited budget to go crazy and you've never really been in the studio to know what you're supposed to do, that I think clearly illustrates the difference of the Wrecking Crew going, okay, let's do it, the 3 songs, let's do it, let's get the tracks, let's do boom, 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 and leave the artist to overdub their vocals, and or any other instrument they might want to do. But it's like, I think.
Well, it's interesting. Earl Palmer had a great line. He said, they weren't recording dates anymore. They were recording projects.
Great distinction.
And he said where it was like it would last weeks at a time, and for some artists months. It's just the times changed.
Right.
And I don't know if that was part of the demise of the recording business as well as the waste. When there's $350,000 budget, $350,000. This is 15 years ago. It was like $350,000 again. Oh my God! What do you need $350,000 for an acoustic kind of thing? It wasn't like a massive band. It was put the Eagles together type of thing.
Okay, well let's look at this progression. Is up until multi-tracking, you did the whole record.
Exactly.
Horns, strings, background singers. That's why so many studios have folded and gone out of business. What do you want? If you get the $350,000 budget, you can take at least half of that and set yourself up, or less, with the studio, and pocket the rest.
Well, I don't think anybody has that anymore.
That's the point. There's no advances like that. I mean, it has to be a unique situation or unique artist or something like that. But that's a backlash. One of the worst stories I've ever heard of, and I won't name the band, but in the '80s, they were metal.
Are they on the wall?
No, they are not on the wall for a reason. But they got a big budget, and the first thing they did was block book the studio in Hollywood here, and spent. Okay, I got to say that word again because it's unbelievable. They spent 3 weeks just setting up the drum sound.
Is this the thing that the drummer came in and they spent hours, and they're all waiting for the drummer to tune everything, and then he ends up playing a percussion instrument.
Oh yeah, right.
Oh God! So that's what he ended up doing.
But that's the kind of mentality, and that's because it comes from not knowing. And you're experimenting and learning on somebody else's dollar, which in reality is your dollar because it's in advance.
Well, that's the problem. No one understood that, and that's why I'm looking at all those videos we used to do. We might have, I was on cheap videos, big videos or cheap videos. A cheap video was $100,000. That 100,000 was $100,000 worth of CDs, more than that they before they even saw their money. So it was like, how much, you know, and then those other videos. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah, and it's coming out of you, the artist.
Yeah.
And it's coming out of your pocket as the artist and production company, etc. Which a lot of people never connected the dots on that one.
I guess I don't know. I mean, I was just lighting and I knew what the dots were.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe it's just because, you know, that's their break and they need a video, and there's someone at the record company saying you need a video.
Well, you know, there was that time MTV.
Yeah.
It was like, you have a video? No.
Yeah,
Well, then
right.
sorry, babe.
Yeah.
You know, come see us when you get a video.
Yeah.
So
It's a wicked circle.
it is a wicked circle, but look at now we have the digital age.
Yep.
There's good aspects and bad aspects. You know, there was a reason people got record deals and also didn't get record deals.
Yeah.
Record deals, serious record deals, because you know, now you have to be a business. Nobody goes to a club and says, oh, I found this band and it's really, you know, it's so exciting. But back to the Wrecking Crew. Wrecking Crew, bottom line's all that. Here's your record, here's your track, here's some of the greatest musical minds who do this every day, every second of their lives.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's the thing is, you know, those musicians, your dad, my dad, and all of them, they play more music every day than any of these other bands would ever put together in their whole lifetime.
Right.
Because they went from a different artist. At 8 o'clock in the morning, they'd be at Gold Star. At 11 o'clock in the morning, they might be at Capitol. And 2 o'clock is somewhere else, and later that evening somewhere else.
Right.
So they were working with so many different groups. And there was, and the other thing that was really cool is there was no cell phones.
Right.
It was a dog-eat-dog world, but there was no cell phones. Remember, there was all those phones up on the wall.
The rack of answering service phones.
So during the break, the 10-minute break, people would grab those phones, check with their answering service. You got any calls? No.
Yeah.
And then boom. And then my father would make that drive home from wherever, Hollywood to Northridge. And the first thing he would say when he walked in, any calls.
Right, that was it.
Which meant, did the answering service call? You know, they would just say, oh yeah, you got, you know, another gig tonight or tomorrow, whatever. But it was a different time period.
What I like is these guys literally have a schedule like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they think, okay, my last gig is at so-and-so. And then they get the call like, hey, can you rush right over because so-and-so can't make it.
Yeah.
And then they're already exhausted and it's like you just keep going.
Yeah, because no one knew when it was going to end.
Right.
You know, it's like we all do things wondering, is this the time that something's going to change my life? Or you don't want something to change in your life. That's why you don't turn anything down. Because the next guy could take the job.
Right.
You know, oh, guess what? He's working with so-and-so now forever. And, you know, you know what? Here's a question.
Yeah.
When Phil and Hal were so tight.
Phil Spector and Hal Blaine?
Yeah, when they were so tight in the studios, and this is, I heard different, because Hal doesn't remember this. My dad said at one point, Phil had a falling out with Hal because Hal couldn't make it certain recording dates, and that's when he started using Earl.
Right.
And I think that's what Earl remembered too, but do you remember any of that? Or you heard any of that?
I'll tell you. I know that Phil wanted his group to show up. And
I felt he owned them.
Right. Well, he thought he got first priority.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, I'm the first crack here. You know, I'm the first go-to. Get a sub. That's a substitute. Call him
For
a
the
sub.
other guy.
Yeah, it's like, I know they want you, Hal, because I want you.
Right.
And I really want you here. And, you know, you can get emotionally hurt. You can get musically hurt. And in his case, I'm sure it was very musical and emotional that it's like, hey, come on, we need you here. You know what I mean? Now, being second generation Wrecking Crew, one of the few, if only one of two, we worked with Keltner. Jim Keltner came in and worked with Hal a lot. They were double drums on those kind of dates. And
but that was even in the 70s. That was later.
Yeah, 70s, right.
Yeah.
That was in the next go around when Phil came back from England after working with Beatles and John Lennon and George Harrison. But yeah, that's accurate.
So that's pretty much that's what I figured.
Yeah, it's an accurate accounting. But I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, we're all people.
No, because I couldn't remember, because Phil, I don't know, Phil, what I heard is, he just wasn't available, and then Earl came in and started doing it, and did the Righteous Brothers and the Tina stuff, Ike and Tina. Which, in a lot of ways, it makes sense, too, drum-wise. I mean, not that...
Well, yeah, it does. Earl...
I can't think of anybody but Earl on that now.
Now, here's one for you. Earl is on I'm Walking, that my dad produced for Ricky Nelson on Verve. And that was Ricky's first big hit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Walking, which was a fast phenomenon, too, which is a whole other story.
Because he did the original.
Yeah, and so, there you go. All right, Wrecking Crew, the Wrecking Crew movie.
Right. Yes.
Tell us encapsulation.
Where we're at.
Yeah.
Encapsulation. It's the story. Yeah. Wrecking Crew is the story of the session players in the 1960s and 70s in Los Angeles that basically recorded for Sinatra, the Beach Boys. They were Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, Jan and Dean, Mamas and Papas. Anything that was being recorded in LA, they were the guys to do it. And this story started in 1996, and we're here in 2012. The film's been around the world, lots of awards. The only reason it hasn't been released yet is these things called All the Songs. So we're slowly paying them off with donations. We've been doing that for the last 2 years, and we're about 100,000 away.
So are you looking for a combination of theatrical and DVD release?
Yeah, DVD. You have to do a DVD release because now I have all these 16 years of outtakes.
Yeah, the expanded version.
Yeah, I mean, there's 5 DVD, box set at this point.
It's a deluxe box set.
Oh, absolutely.
Cool, so you got that going.
Yeah.
Well, Denny Tedesco, glad to have you on the show.
You, sir.
Inside the Cave Hollywood. I'm David Kessel, your host, and The Wrecking Crew.
Yep. www.wreckingcrewfilm.com.
Excellent.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
All right, good to see you, man.
To learn more about The Wrecking Crew, go to www.wreckingcrewfilm.com. I'm your host, David Kessel. This has been an episode of Inside the Cave.